This is a story that was included in actually 2 of my books, including the most recent one called 43. And it's a story about my friend Byron. In the 5 years that I've known Byron, he lost almost everything in a house fire. And for over 3 years, he and his daughter had to shuffle around from home to home while they rebuilt. He had broken his hip twice, but persisted through rehab and still managed to show up to class anyway. Rain, sleet, walker, or wheelchair couldn't keep him away. Not bad for a man upwards of 90 years old. Byron and I were classmates. In my head, he was a friend of mine, but I hesitate to say that aloud because the truth is, I wasn't a very good friend in return. Outside of writing class and our group lunches afterward, I didn't give much of my time to him. As I got a little braver with my writing, I began work on my memoir project. With trepidation, I wrote about a brief fling I'd had with a 41-year-old man when I was just 19 years old. This class consisted mainly of seniors whom I was becoming quite attached to. Slowly, they'd taken me in as a sort of surrogate daughter, a feeling I'd been missing for some time. I wrote about this infatuation that I had when I was working at Denny's, and I worked the night shift. And I felt incredibly vulnerable with each word I described the staff and how the cook in the kitchen used to play Robin Hood and feed us poor workers all sorts of yummy things once the management had gone home. As I began to read the story aloud, however, I realized I'd forgotten to edit it and take out the sex scene. It wasn't graphic, but considering the audience and my extreme shyness, it just didn't seem appropriate. I forged ahead, blushing be damned. When I finished, there came the longest silence. Byron leaned his tall, lanky body forward and looked at me with big hands clasped together. I braced myself as he spoke in his gravelly voice. I used to own a Denny's in Southern California. I always wondered where the food was disappearing to, now I know. And with that, Byron chiseled right through the ice. A few years later, as class commenced for a new quarter, I knew better than to offer critiques because I was having a shit day and would end up taking it out on everybody's work. Keeping quiet in my little corner, I felt sad because I could see Byron's mind deteriorating on the paper before me. Scattered sentences, repeated paragraphs, his weakened voice lost track of the words, and all around the room was silence. The silence was heavy because nobody wanted to speak the truth. Afterwards, as I wandered slowly to the parking lot, a young man approached me and motioned to the car where he had just settled Byron into his seat. Mr. Citron would like to speak to you, the aide said politely. I walked over, trying to muster a smile. Hi, Byron. He looked at me square in the eye. Why didn't you comment on my story? I stammered, I'm tired today. I didn't say anything about anyone else's film. But you didn't say anything about mine. I hope you wrote some things down. I need your help. It was almost a reprimand, but the thing about Byron was that his scowls and growls were often hiding a smile. Next time, Byron, I promised. I sensed he knew the story was a mess and was calling me out for not saying so. A month later, several of us were having lunch after class, and I asked Byron how he was doing. It was a blustery November day. He was bundled up in his chair at the Chinese restaurant, his grumpy demeanor topping my usual dourness. How are you doing, Byron? He thought for several seconds before answering, his square jaw moving slowly back and forth as he rolled his words around in his head. They said I have bone cancer. They're shooting me up with all kinds of drugs, different treatments. I don't know what for. With a sudden shift, he began to talk about the weather and how he could never figure out his damn email. I sipped my water in silence. Last week I learned the end was near for Byron. Expected, yeah, but sadness engulfed me all the same. I I told my friend Josh, who had waited on us at our last holiday lunch in December, "Was he that feisty old guy in the wheelchair?" He laughed. He was cranky, but he was all right at the end. He was awesome. Yes, feisty is a word for Byron. At 95 years old, he'd survived his share of life. I wanted to write a letter to him, but the task before me was daunting. How to say farewell without saying goodbye? He was a smart cookie and would know if he was being written off. In my dilemma, I buried my denial. If I didn't write the letter, Byron would die. He's a feisty old guy. He'll hang on, demanding his sugary Coke and fatty butter from his caretakers. I wasn't strong enough to visit, and truthfully, I wanted to remember him at a more festive time with his friends. I've sat by one deathbed too many in my lifetime already. My mind kept floating back to that day at the car, Byron chastising me. I remember being surprised at his having noticed. For most of my life, it was always my outspoken ways that went noticed, and rarely with admiration. It is my silence that is ignored, and Byron had heard my silence. Byron passed away in his sleep this morning, I hope with peace in his heart. Everyone comes along in a lifetime for a reason. I needed to be heard, even when I had nothing to say.